Hello everyone, this is Mateo with Arcade.dev. If you're following the AI developments lately, you've probably heard about agents and how the agentic world will bring the AI promise to the masses. Before I talk about what an agent actually is from a technical perspective, I wanted to bring you back in history and talk about the infrastructure that makes agents happen. I will go back in time and I will explain the developments that integrated early AI models into computer programs, all the way to today with the new capabilities and the motivations that made them happen. Let's go there. Arcade is the best platform for agentic action. It unifies all your models, agents, tools, and MCP servers into a single platform that handles tool management and authentication seamlessly. Arcade is built by experts in AI, identity, and distributed systems. Try Arcade today at arcade.dev. So I'm gonna make a timeline here, and the timeline is gonna assume that the agents that we're talking about use an LLM as their brain. The evolution of LLM, we'll call it. So I'm gonna draw a line as a before and after, and I'm gonna put this here, and it's gonna be OpenAI releases its API, right? And I have a bunch of articles here on top by OpenAI. The first one is June 2020. June 2020, OpenAI releases on the API. Before this, you have your AI model, and this could be recurrent neural network, clustering, algorithm, a graph, net, random forest, or whatever. So all of these would speak very different interfaces, right? Like a recurrent neural network would need one specific type of matrix with a specific shape. A clustering algorithm would need specific data that you need to pre-process, all of that. So there will be a lot of pre-processing, and this will be like classical computing or classical programming sort of ideas, right? So you will take this input, pre-process it, pre-process text and in a website or whatever, and then pass it here, and then you will get something out that you need to process. So this will be like vector or matrix that you then need to post-process with classical programming. So the intelligent bit would happen here. These are the intelligent nodes, and I'm gonna color them in blue. They require specific input, and they reply with an intelligent answer, which is a vector matrix, right? And this is sort of the case as well for after the release of the API, but it was clear by this day, by 2020, that something special was happening in the GPT. This is actually before ChatGPT. GPT is kind of a breakthrough in natural language processing, and people are like, okay, this is different. It's not just a recurrent neural network. It's actually very useful to model complex writing, or way more complex writing than anything else at the time. The idea now was, okay, we can structure this into a more general pattern. So you would still do pre-processing, like get some text, format it in a specific way, remove some special characters or whatever. You will get GPT here, and you will get text out, right? So you don't need to post-process anymore. Well, a little bit, but you get text. So this is not anything that is so esoteric. What would internally happen is you put text in GPT, that's the thing, it will embed or whatever, and you also have like an embedding endpoint, right? That then you can use to post-process. So these, you could come here and post-process, right? Embedding is just a vector, so I'm going to call this like an intelligent element. Like this is something that you cannot read exactly. You can feed it into GPT as well for processing. And this will be the beginning of what enables something like retrieval augmented generation, right? So at this point in time, you already start seeing the early beginnings of like LLM-based chatbots, right? And the early versions of RAG systems, right? Because you have an embedding endpoint and you can search against this, right? It was not like a RAG chatbot, and it would not be able to ingest all of the PDFs and so on. But RAG was essentially at the time a context size extender technique, basically, right? You would use embeddings to kind of narrow down your thing and send, right? The techniques back then were still based on completion, right? So LLMs are mostly completion based. That means you give it the initial piece of the text, and what it produces is the next tokens or the rest of the paragraph, something like that. Now we move forward in time a little bit, and we are in November 2022, and it introduces ChatGPT, right? So what we learn between here and that is the realization that people want to give instructions to the LLM, and that comes in the form of instruct GPT, which is a fancy way of saying reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? And that technique makes it very easy to tell the model what to do. And something that you can tell the model to do is, okay, you have this collection of things that you can do. What would you do? So it's the beginning, the early phases of like planning, like LLM-based planning. So now you're all of a sudden saying, okay, I have this collection of things. Like if you want me to give you information about the date, return this string, get date. If you want information about, I don't know, my birthday, return with like get birthday or something, right? So this is the beginning, the early days of function calling. But this was text-based. And at this time, the thing is that I can get this and this post-process bit. What I can do here now is I can say call a function here based on what the LLM says. Actually, let me put it here and let me move all of this a little bit down, right? So now you can call a function here based on the text that is returned, and you can connect this back to the LLM. Just like that. It can be more complex. I can, take this, feed it into an embedding, search, reprocess. It could be a more complex loop. But the idea is now I give GPT the ability to tell me, okay, call this function. But it's a kind of clunky system because the communication channel is just text. It's natural language text that I need to post-process somehow. And back then, some of the techniques were like, give me this specific string when you want to do this. But this becomes early agents era. And I'm gonna put agents here in quotes because we will talk about the definition of agents in another video. So here, the next thing that happens is that this becomes so popular and so useful, even in this clunky state, that ChatGPT releases plugins. Right? So we are now in March 2023, and we have ChatGPT plugins. You would see experiments happen, and these are some papers, and actually in the early version of LangChain, you see augmented language models, transformer language model can teach themselves to use tools. So you have this idea, transformer for actions, and LangChain, which already had this idea of agents, is an LLM that can choose a sequence of actions today. But you would still need to interpret the actions based on natural language. Right? So this idea became so powerful that they released in March 2023 ChatGPT plugins. And the diagram looks the same, plugins are really kind of these two pieces here that will feed back into the model or will return to the user. You have something here like just print to user, for example, right? So that would be the same, ChatGPT with plugins. But the interesting bit, in my opinion here, is that we move from that into a copy of the same thing, and here we have a new sort of interface. What GPT will implement internally is structured inputs, JSON, right? And here you would get also text and JSON mode, right? So we are starting to make this a bit more useful for programmers and so on. So JSON mode is an imperfect way of doing this, right? So you already have a less clunky version of this loop, right? Because yes, we could always control the input, but now you can tell the LLM, this is what you should give me to call the function. So the structured input is something that would determine better inputs to your function. You pass schemas in, but it gives the LLM instructions, because it's instruct GPT, to output that specific structure for functions. So this comes together actually in June. So I'm gonna put this March to June 2023, ChatGPT plugins and function. Here we are already in kind of the full-blown era of RAG systems, right? Because you can, well, I guess this is not for embeddings, but you can already search, you can already do a lot of things. So you start getting RAG systems, RAG-based search engines, and web browsing and integrations, which are usually custom GPTs. Just a little bit later, I think the best came from OpenAI, which is GPT-4o. And this is May 2024. So about a year ago, May 2024, they released. And I'm not gonna put GPT-4o here because the important bit that they release here is structured outputs. Now we have struct GPT, JSON mode, and we also have structured outputs. We still have all of these, right? And then, we improve RAG-based engines and all of that, because the beauty of structured outputs is that this post-processing is very minimal now. I don't need to do a lot of work because I can just interpret the structured outputs, determine, do some light validation. So this post-processing becomes cheaper from here to here, but mostly from here to here, because there was a lot of errors here in the structured inputs era, but JSON mode era, right? Because you will get a lot of non-valid JSON, you will need to parse it, you would have to go back to instruct GPT and tell it this was wrong, please generate it right or whatever. So it was a lot of pain. But here, all of a sudden, this loop becomes so useful that it makes sense now to start implementing very good tools here. May 2024, right? Structured outputs make all of this happen. So what happens now is that we start seeing rules-based patterns, right? And this is what will ultimately become agents, right? And because we don't have to focus on this works well enough now. So we trust the agent to know what parameters to put into a function and so on. So we start improving this part. And the current era here, where we are now, so now here to the right, we start seeing more iterations on this. We start working on how to call a function. And we have remote function calling, right? And then local function calling, which is the classical one. So remote function calling now is, okay, I need to do this through an API, and we start seeing like static endpoints at the beginning, and now we are seeing things like MCP. So MCP is the protocol that will say, give me how this function looks like, all of that. The entire program, here will like fetch all of the tools, all of that. But then this, I will put like an MCP client somewhere. Through MCP, I will call something like arcade, right? And arcade, I'm gonna put it in red here. This will connect to other people, like, for example, Google, Microsoft, and Twitter, and so on. So this is the current infrastructure that makes agent possible. Right? So that's the story of the evolution of tool calling as I see it. In the next video, I will explain what agents actually are and how and why they are related to tool calling. Until the next time, happy building.